Elijah Vance knew the smell of poverty like a second skin. It was a scent of damp drywall, stale frying oil, and the faint metallic tang of desperation that clung to the industrial suburb of Black Creek, Ohio. His life was a narrow, steep path carved out of Rust Belt, a constant, exhausting ascent fueled by the light in his mother's eyes. Eleanor Vance was the single, frail pillar of their existence, working double shifts at the cannery, her hands perpetually stained with tomato paste and exhaustion. Eli, at 16, carried the crushing weight of the precarious survival on shoulders already too broad for his age. His father, a ghost named Robert, had left behind two things: a talent for numbers that Eli inherited, and a gambling debt to Leo, a local figure whose smile held a cold promise of broken kneecaps. When Eleanor fell ill, a cough that lasted too long, a fever that wouldn't break, the medical bills arrived like an avalanche. Eli watched his mother shrink, her hope becoming a dwindling candle flame he desperately needed to shield. The turning point came on a Tuesday night in November. The city was cloaked in a chilling, persistent drizzle. Eli, hunched over the kitchen table under a flickering fluorescent bulb, was staring at a final eviction notice when the back door rattled. It was Leo. Leo wasn't a brute. He was far worse. He was polished, soft-spoken, and he dealt in favors more than threats, which made the obligation feel heavier. He smelled of expensive cologne and the kind of success that bypassed education. "Your old man owed me, Eli," Leo said, leaning against the doorway, his silhouette blocking the meager kitchen light. "But I'm a forward-looking man. That brain of yours, boy, that's collateral." Eli had been secretly running small-time operations for local kids, using his uncanny knack for market predictions, buying and selling used goods, timing the pawn shops. He was brilliant, but dangerously naive about the scale of the world's darkness. Leo didn't ask for cash. He asked for information. He needed Eli to calculate the risk on a shipment coming through the docks, a task that felt abstract and safe in the sterile environment of his mind. Leo promised a sizable, life-saving sum, enough to pay Eleanor's debts and secure a college application. Eli wrestled with the decision. The moral compass inherited from his mother spun wildly, but the image of her gaunt face anchored him. He agreed. He spent 3 days in a library far across town, using their computers to analyze shipping manifests and cryptic code numbers Leo provided. The work felt like a puzzle, challenging and clean, divorced from the criminality of its intent. He delivered the analysis on a folded, ink-stained napkin. Leo counted out a thick wad of hundreds. It was more money than Eli had ever seen. For a brief, intoxicating week, the air in the Vance house was clear. Eleanor rested, the bills were paid, and Eli could breathe. He bought his mother a warm blanket, a small, unnecessary luxury, and watched her smile. That smile, he decided, was worth any price. But the price was never just money. Leo had a way of weaving his influence into the fabric of a person's life, threading the darkness through the light. 2 weeks later, a news bulletin flashed across the old Zenith television set. A large-scale police raid on the Black Creek docks, seizing millions in contraband. The operation was disrupted, but Leo was nowhere near the arrests. Eli felt a dizzying coldness spread through his chest. He hadn't just paid a debt. He had become a tool, a silent partner in the very grime he was trying to escape. The money in his sock drawer suddenly felt poisoned. He understood then that his path out of the ash had been paved with the grit of moral compromise, a deal struck not with the devil, but with his own crippling fear. As he looked at the money, a terrifying thought surfaced. He was still indebted not financially, but spiritually, to the shadows of Black Creek, and they would always know where to find him. The scholarship to NYU was Eli's desperate passport out of Black Creek. He took Eleanor's hand on the day he left, pressing the key to their debt-free, refurbished apartment into her palm. "I'm building something real, Mom," he promised. His voice raw with the fervor of a man fleeing a burning house. Something they can't take away. He never told her about Leo, instead framing his newfound financial stability as a result of a lucky trading break. She simply looked at him, her eyes clouded with an unnamed worry, a mother's intuition sensing the lie beneath the sacrifice. New York City was a dizzying rush of glass and ambition, a place where the air was thinner and the stakes were higher. Eli thrived. His natural talent for pattern recognition, a skill honed on Black Creek's volatile streets, translated perfectly to quantitative finance. He graduated top of his class and was quickly snapped up by a fiercely competitive hedge fund. His rise was meteoric, fueled by an almost manic focus. He worked 16-hour days, subsisting on adrenaline and the fear of failure. He meticulously distanced himself from his past, changing his phone number, limiting calls home to strained, brief updates, terrified that a lingering scent of grit would compromise his grace. By 25, he was a vice president, his name whispered in the hallowed corridors of power. He had the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the suits tailored in London, and the cold, unshakable belief that wealth was an impenetrable fortress against vulnerability. But his success had hollowed him out. He was lonely, driven, and desperately sought validation in the external markers of his victory. This is where Veronica stepped in. He met her at a charity gala, a dizzying, overly lit affair designed to launder the guilt of the ultra-wealthy. Veronica Dubois was a masterpiece of old money sophistication, an heiress to a nearly extinct manufacturing fortune. She had eyes the color of iced champagne and a smile that seemed to promise access to a world Eli had only glimpsed through the windows of luxury cars. She was dazzling, effortlessly elegant, and utterly dismissive of his working-class roots, which, paradoxically, appealed to his self-hating ambition. He saw her not just as a woman, but as a final, necessary accessory to his new identity, the validation that he truly belonged. Their courtship was a whirlwind of black-tie events, European weekends, and toxic codependence. Veronica loved the idea of Eli, the self-made titan, the man who had battled the odds. She didn't love Elijah. She loved the status his intensity provided. Eli, blind to everything but the shimmering surface of her world, willingly surrendered his last remaining scrap of genuine self to her gilded image. She encouraged his workaholism, subtly mocking his attempts to connect with his mother, referring to Black Creek as that quaint little industrial park. His isolation became her tool. One evening, months into their engagement, they were hosting a small gathering at Eli's penthouse. Veronica, tipsy on vintage Bordeaux, was showing off a ludicrously expensive antique diamond necklace, a family heirloom that Eli had paid a substantial sum to redeem from a murky estate sale. A flicker of something crossed her face as she looked at the gem, a nervousness that belied her usual composure. "It almost didn't make it," she murmured, clutching the stones. The family's finances were complicated. Eli, consumed by the need to protect her, to prove his worth, simply squeezed her hand and changed the subject. He missed the subtle, almost imperceptible way she glanced toward the door just before her family's lawyer arrived. The lawyer, a slick, pale man named Julian, raised a glass of couple, but his eyes, sharp and proprietary, lingered on Eli for a beat too long. As Julian was leaving, Eli overheard a hushed exchange between him and Veronica near the elevators, a fragment that struck him cold. He paid the marker Ronnie, for now, but Leo doesn't forgive debts based on sentiment. The elevator doors closed before Eli could react, leaving him standing in the echoing silence of his marble foyer, his heart hammering against his ribs. Leo, the ghost of Black Creek, the specter of his original sin, was not only in his world, but, impossibly, spoke the same language as the woman he was about to marry. The gilded cage was starting to feel like a trap, and the woman who held the key was not a savior, but perhaps the architect of his demise. The wedding was a spectacular, vulgar display of wealth on the cliffs of Newport, Rhode Island, paid for almost entirely by Eli. He justified the expense as an investment in his future, a necessary social contract. The knot tied between them was made of silk and steel, binding Eli more tightly to Veronica's world than he could ever have imagined. Immediately after the honeymoon, the subtle pressure escalated into suffocating control. Veronica began overseeing every aspect of their social life, meticulously curating their circle, ensuring that no one from Eli's past, especially not his mother, Eleanor, ever breached the fortress of their new life. His days became a relentless performance. At the office, he was a ruthless financier, expanding his portfolio with reckless speed. At home, he was a doting husband, financing Veronica's dizzying collection of art and clothes. His success, once a source of pride, now felt like a debt he was forever paying off to maintain the illusion of control. He was so far from the desperate boy in Black Creek. Yet the anxiety was identical. Only now, the stakes were 7 figures higher. The fractures in the facade started small. He noticed the way Veronica's consumption wasn't about pleasure, but a frantic need to fill a void. She had a terrifying pattern of sudden, inexplicable financial obligations, which she always dismissed as family matters. Eli, drowning in his own work, always signed the checks, blinded by the possessive, intoxicating desire to be the man who could solve all her problems. One rainy Tuesday, while retrieving a lost document from Veronica's rarely used mahogany desk, he found a folded, yellowed receipt tucked beneath a stack of high-end jewelry appraisals. The date was 6 months before they had even met, and the receipt was from a seedy-looking pawn operation on the outskirts of Black Creek. The item listed was heirloom necklace, antique diamond, and the signature at the bottom, scrawled in a frantic hand, was unmistakably Veronica Dubois. A cold wave of recognition hit him. The antique necklace she had been so nervous about, the one he'd paid a fortune to redeem from an estate sale, had been pawned in his hometown months before their introduction. But the real terror came from the recipient's stamp on the paper, a small, stylized lion's head, identical to the logo of Leo's legitimate but thinly veiled collections business. The confrontation that night was a masterpiece of melodrama. Eli, holding the receipt, demanded the truth. Veronica, instead of denying it, turned the tables with devastating coldness. Of course I owed Leo Elijah. My father's foolish ventures left us exposed. Do you think you're the only one who had to make deals to survive? The difference is, I found the smartest way to pay him off. Marry the only man he ever truly feared. You, Eli. She revealed that Julian, the family lawyer, was Leo's contact. Her entire family was indebted to Leo's empire, and Leo had used her to get closer to the boy who beat his first big operation years ago. Eli wasn't her savior. He was a final, largest installment on her family's debt, a human collateral to be milked for every cent. His success hadn't built a fortress. It painted a giant target on his back, and his wife was the one holding the crosshairs steady. The shock rendered Eli paralyzed. His entire world, his grace, his success, his love, was a choreographed lie designed by the ghosts of his past. The next morning, a certified letter arrived at his office. It was a formal notification from the firm's board of directors, citing irregular trading activity and calling for an immediate audit. The investigation had been triggered by an anonymous tip from within his inner circle. Eli knew, with a certainty that turned his blood to ice, that the knife was in his back and Veronica's manicured hand was on the hilt. The debt was being collected, and this time it wouldn't stop at money. His very life, his reputation, and his future were now the forfeit. The ensuing weeks were a dizzying, terrifying descent. The regulatory investigation moved with brutal efficiency. The irregular activity was subtle, complex manipulation, trades that, when viewed in isolation, looked like aggressive genius, but when clustered together, looked like deliberate market destabilization designed to benefit a shadowy third party. Eli recognized the pattern immediately. It was a larger, more sophisticated version of the risk assessment he provided Leo years ago, only this time he was a victim, not the reluctant analyst. He realized Veronica and Julian had been monitoring his trading strategies for months, using his own brilliance against him to pay off Leo's massive syndicate. Eli tried to fight back, hiring the most expensive legal team, but every avenue was blocked. Julian had anticipated his moves, and Veronica, in a calculated move of self-preservation, had already filed for divorce, citing emotional abuse, and isolated herself in the marital penthouse, guarded by her own security detail, men who looked suspiciously like Leo's former muscle. She painted Eli as a volatile, self-made fraudster, effectively dissolving his standing in the high society world he had fought so hard to join. He moved out of the penthouse, retreating to a sterile, rented apartment downtown. He was a man accustomed to leading an army of analysts, now alone, watching his empire crumble from the cheap view of a high-rise window. He finally reached out to his mother, Eleanor, needing the clean, uncorrupted solace of her love. But when he called Black Creek, the line was disconnected. Panic set in. He drove the long, desolate hours back to Ohio, the luxurious car he still owned feeling like a coffin on wheels. When he reached the small apartment, the door was ajar. The home was empty, spotless, and silent, the comforting scent of home replaced by the heavy odor of disuse. A single small handwritten note was tacked to the refrigerator, bearing Eleanor's familiar, shaky script. Eli, he came for the last debt, said he just needed me to sign something, to clear up the old business. I couldn't reach you. Don't come looking. It's too late. I love you. The note was unsigned, but the meaning was devastatingly clear. Leo had taken his collateral, and now Eli had nothing left to lose. The ultimate betrayal was a realization that Leo hadn't just wanted money or information. He wanted the total, spectacular destruction of the boy who had once outsmarted him, a public execution designed to instill terror. He had waited years, letting Eli build his grace only to watch it turn to dust. Eli was beyond fear now. He felt a cold, sharp clarity. He knew where Leo was based, an old, abandoned warehouse district by the river, a place where the shadows of Black Creek were darkest. He walked back to his car, discarding his expensive jacket. He was no longer the vice president, no longer the socialite husband. He was just Eli Vance, the desperate boy from the grit, coming home to finish the transaction he had started a decade ago. He drove toward the river, the city lights fading behind him. He wasn't planning on winning. He was planning on ending the cycle. He realized that the only thing worse than living in poverty was sacrificing everything, including his soul and his mother's safety, for a success that was never truly his own. He parked the car, the engine ticking in oppressive silence. Ahead, the hulking shadow of the warehouse glowed faintly from a single, weak bulb above a steel door. As Eli stepped out, the river breeze whispered, carrying with the smell of rust and salt and the indelible scent of his own approaching tragedy. The steel door creaked open under Eli's touch, ushering him into the cavernous, cold interior of the warehouse. The space was mostly empty, save for a few stacks of decaying crates and the ghostly shafts of moonlight cutting through the grimy windows high above. In the center, under the lone working light, stood a table. Leo was seated comfortably, examining a thick ledger, and standing beside him, perfectly composed and utterly without remorse, was Veronica. Elijah, Leo said, closing the book with a deliberate thud. His voice was warm, almost avuncular, the sound of a patient creditor finally getting paid. I knew you'd come. Family is an expensive habit, isn't it? Especially yours. Eli's eyes, burning with a decade of suppressed pain, fixed on Veronica. Where's my mother? Veronica took a slow, deliberate sip from a glass of what looked like whiskey, her expression bored. Eleanor is fine. Just secured her signature on a few papers. Nothing important to you, just a transfer of property rights. You see, Elijah, Black Creek has always been Leo's. You simply made the mistake of thinking you could leave without paying the exit fee. Leo chuckled, gesturing to the ledger. The debt wasn't the 20 grand I gave you for your mother, Eli. The debt was you. I wanted to watch you fly, thinking you were free, only to realize the string was tied to my finger the whole time. You marry Veronica. You give her access to your trading strategies. She pays off her family, and my operation gets a nice, legal layer of protection in your clean firm. It was beautiful synergy. The truth was a physical blow. His ambition had been Leo's puppet master. His love for Veronica was just leverage. Eli didn't plead or argue. He stepped toward the table, a strange, profound calm settling over him. You took everything. My money, my name, my wife, my mother's home. What's left, Leo? Leo smiled, pointing a remote at a large, dusty screen that lowered from the ceiling. A live video feed flickered to life. It showed Eleanor, sitting alone in a brightly lit, sterile room, signing paperwork under the watchful eye of Julian. She looked tired, but unharmed. "The deal is simple, Leo said, leaning forward. "You disappear. You walk out that door. You sign a full confession to the SEC regarding the market manipulation, taking the fall for Veronica and the firm. And your mother walks free, with enough cash to disappear too. You go back to the grit, and you never look at Grace again." Eli looked from the screen back to Veronica. She met his gaze, devoid of love, pity, or even regret. Only cold, hard victory. "And if I don't?" Eli asked, his voice low. "Then the police find your mother in Black Creek with very, very strong evidence that she aided and abetted a major financial fraud." Julian is very persuasive. Eli stood at the precipice of his life. He could fight, go to the police, expose Veronica, but his mother would be ruined, likely imprisoned, the price of his decade-long ambition. Or he could complete the trade. He could make the ultimate sacrifice for the love he had tried to outrun. A slow, tragic smile crossed his face. He picked up the pen and, with the same analytical precision he used to make millions, he signed a confession, a document that detailed his supposed guilt in a complex web of deceit. He signed away his freedom, his reputation, and his future. As he finished, Veronica looked at him with something that might have been fleeting respect. "Smart move, Eli. You finally learned the rules." "No," Eli whispered, dropping the pen. He was looking at the flickering reflection of the warehouse light on the wet concrete floor. "I learned the price." Before Leo could call his men, Eli didn't run. He walked with measured steps to a nearby stack of unsecured, rusted machinery. He didn't have a gun, but he had the strength of absolute despair. With a guttural cry that echoed off the high rafters, a final, desperate sound of a man who realized his entire adult life was a sham, he hurled himself against a stack of metal supports. The entire column of decaying iron buckled, shearing off a massive, heavy length of pipe that swung outward, aimed at the only true architect of his downfall. The scene descended into chaos. The heavy pipe missed Veronica, striking the large monitor broadcasting his mother's image, shattering the screen into a cascade of sparks and black smoke. Leo shouted, his men running in from the shadows. Eli didn't stop. He turned and ran toward the one part of the structure that looked most fragile, an ancient elevated fire escape that was clearly marked for demolition. He reached the rusted ladder and started climbing, not to escape, but to draw them higher. Leo's men followed, their weight straining the decaying metal. Eli reached the top platform just as the first sirens, distant but distinct, wailed from the direction of the docks. Perhaps a prearranged signal. Perhaps a coincidence. Leo's men hesitated below. Eli looked down, his silhouette stark against the weak moon. He felt the structure groan, its failure imminent. He had lost everything. His mother was indebted, Veronica was free, and his name was toxic. His grass to grace life had been merely a highly profitable, self-destructing illusion. With a final, silent acceptance of his fate, Eli did not jump. He simply released his grip on the rusted railing. The sound of the collapse was a deafening, metallic shriek that swallowed the distant sirens, burying him in a collapsing platform in a final, unforgiving cloud of steel and dust. The wreckage was deemed a tragic accident, a structural failure in an abandoned warehouse. The signed confession was recovered, securing Veronica's freedom and Julian's protection. Eleanor Vance, heartbroken but financially free, moved away, forever haunted by the knowledge that her son's ambition and final, desperate act had paid her ultimate ransom. Eli Vance, the brilliant boy who clawed his way to grace, ended not in glory, but as a footnote in a police report, an echo in the dust of the old city he tried so fiercely to leave behind.